Democrats can't force Palantir to answer any of those questions. They can't force Palantir to produce any records or documents. Someone who could would be the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer. He's a Republican from Kentucky. But James Comer, the day after the inauguration this January, bought stock in Palantir. That was his only stock purchase that day.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup.
This is Ashley with Status Coup.
On the ground.
In Philadelphia.
Flint, Michigan. East Palestine, Ohio. Please support the leading independent news outlet on the ground.
Covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, this is Ashley Bishop with Status Coup, and I am very excited to be talking today with Nick Schwellenbach of the Project on Government Oversight. Nick just wrote an excellent piece on Stephen Miller and his financial interest in ICE. The piece is titled Stephen Miller's Financial Stake in ICE Contractor Palantir. Over a dozen Trump appointees in the White House and Department of Homeland Security have owned stock in the controversial company, raising privacy concerns across the political spectrum. So thank you so much for being here, Nick. We have been covering the ICE raids and Stephen Miller's, relentless pursuit of more arrests. His last ask was for like 3,000 people per day to be arrested, to be detained by ICE, and your piece gives a lot of insight into why. So again, this was a really excellent piece. I highly recommend that anyone watching this just go and read it in full because it's very detailed. And again, it was a great write-up and extremely insightful. So can you give viewers just like a brief overview of what you found in your investigation for this piece?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Ashley. So on a very obscure part of the White House's website, they quietly released over 100 financial disclosures for White House staffers that were filed earlier this year and certified by White House ethics officials. I started going through them, and when going through Stephen Miller's financial disclosure, it popped out that he disclosed holdings between $100,000 and $250,000 of stock in Palantir, which is a federal contractor, not only doing work with immigration and customs enforcement, but the Pentagon, the CIA, many other agencies. Much of that work is very controversial, even aside from Palantir's role in sort of powering the sort of IT of immigration and customs enforcement. Their software helps ICE agents target people to arrest and detain and deport. That they've been modifying their contract with Palantir so that Palantir can do real-time monitoring or near real-time monitoring of self-deportations, and to use this data that Palantir is putting together for ICE to help inform policy and help ICE use its enforcement resources better. That's very bureaucratic speak for helping them round up even more people more efficiently, right, and lead to a lot of these very troubling things that we're constantly hearing on an almost daily basis. So that's the story. There's some, obviously Palantir's work, like I mentioned, goes beyond ICE. There was reporting several weeks ago by the New York Times that the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE as it's better known, was trying to knit together federal data sets from across many different federal agencies. And even some Republicans, even Steve Bannon, expressed some concern about this. So there's a lot of concern about Palantir. Palantir's, stock defenses. Look, we're just a technology company. We provide services for our clients. If you got a problem with it, go to our clients. We care about civil liberties and civil rights. Nonetheless, at least in the past, they have said technology companies that do work with governments deserve scrutiny. They didn't give me a comment in reaction to my queries. Even the Trump White House gave me a comment, but Palantir did not.
That is interesting. I mean, yeah, everything that you laid out is so concerning, so concerning. And I mean, the fact that like Palantir didn't comment, the White House themselves, they commented that is insane. And I guess, you said something that kind of stuck out to me too. Like this technology is being used to help, Palantir's technology is being helped to facilitate self-deportations as well.
Yeah, I think they're trying to figure out who's self-deporting and who's not, partly to help ICE determine whether or not to arrest those people or not. That seems to be why they want that. There may be other reasons why they want that information as well. I should mention the White House claims that Stephen Miller recuses himself from anything having to do with individual stock holdings he has. And that would presumably include Palantir. That's very difficult to assess from the outside. I talked to Don Fox, who used to be the general counsel at the federal agency responsible for government ethics called the Office of Government Ethics. He also used to be the acting head of that office. He said it's just easy to imagine Stephen Miller sitting in meetings with ICE officials. And Stephen Miller is in constant touch with the top echelons of ICE, talking about what are their data analytics needs and, helping them decide whether or not to spend millions of dollars more on companies like Palantir, even though Stephen Miller has a stake in that company. I should mention that Stephen Miller, during the first Trump administration, was also a hardline immigration hawk. We found no indication that he had a financial stake in Palantir back then. I think he would probably be pushing these hardline immigration positions regardless of the stake. But he is now in a position and probably is personally profiting because of that stake in the company. So it may not be motivating his actions per se, but this isn't what the American people should expect of their officials. It's kind of a quaint notion these days, but the whole reason these ethics and conflict of interest laws exist in the first place is because federal officials shouldn't be using their positions to personally profit. Even if that's not the motivation for the decision, they shouldn't be personally profiting. And so typically, ethics officials told me what people in Miller's situation should do is divest. It's very telling that 6 months into this administration, he's not divested from this stock, despite how high profile Palantir is in relation to ICE's work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I mean, just to, kind of underscore what you just said, I mean, he's been so publicly involved with ICE's, I mean, that's what he does. That's what he does. And, his calling for more arrests. And, we've seen reports of the way in which he is asking for more, people to be detained by ICE. I mean, it's just kind of insane that he could also have public holdings in Palantir right now. Again, considering that I think there were reports maybe a few weeks ago where when he had said that, he was calling for 3,000 people a day to be arrested, to be detained by ICE, that he was also, threatening for people to be fired if they didn't meet these quotas. There was a threat of termination if you did not detain enough people. I mean, that is all crazy. And, to your point about, public officials should not have this financial stake in the things that they're promoting. I mean, we just ran a story on several members of Congress who immediately, before and after, Israel bombed Iran, they bought up stocks in defense contractors. And it's for a congressperson to be buying stock in any kind of defense contractor in May or April, when they're, also at the same time pushing for, war with Iran is just insane. So that kind of just, speaks to the point that you just made, that this should not be something that people tolerate. And it should be something that we are aware of when it does happen. I guess I would wonder if you have anything to say on what the kind of broader implications could be of this, of Stephen Miller's entanglement with Palantir, as Palantir is clearly, they're doing everything that they can to have more government contracts, to increase their surveillance capabilities. So I would ask if you have anything else to add on that.
Well, there's a lot of possibilities. So I should mention that Palantir's stock in 2025 to date has shot up by more than 80%. The price of the stock has I believe more than doubled since more than a year ago. Some people think the stock is overvalued, and maybe eventually it will come down. But if they continue to get large federal contracts, and I mentioned the Pentagon is actually their biggest client in the federal government. The Pentagon recently announced it's modifying a contract with Palantir and will steer hundreds of millions of dollars more to Palantir. I think this contract is now valued at more than $1 billion. It's a very big targeting contract. But Stephen Miller's portfolio touches a lot of things, not just ICE. He's the deputy chief of staff for policy, and he is considered possibly the most powerful official, underneath Trump. And so he's got a lot of ways where he can kind of run into ethics troubles, but he also has a lot of ways to personally benefit from his decision-making or his influence inside the administration. I think one thing that's important to know about Stephen Miller is much of his work is behind the scenes. I mean, he's not the most public of Trump officials. He does tweet, for example, but a lot of what he's doing is operating through people he's placed in critical positions throughout the federal bureaucracy, such as ICE, but also elsewhere. So that also creates a documentation problem for people like me. And then you also have to then play out, assume he does something that crosses a legal line and violates a conflict of interest law. Is this Justice Department going to hold him accountable? I'm not going to hold my breath on that front. But it adds another dimension to all of this. This is just what he believes is the best policy for the U.S. You now have sort of an obvious reason to question that. Even if you hate his positions, prior to this, it was always like, well, this guy's just a jerk and he hates immigrants. And, this goes back to high school. There's been a lot written about Stephen Miller over the years, but now he actually has a direct financial stake in the policy decisions that he's driving. Again, that may not be the ultimate motivator of it, but it still raises an additional question about what's going on here. But will anything happen in terms of holding him accountable if he does cross a legal line? And ethics experts told me if he hasn't crossed the line, he's come close to crossing it based on what's publicly known so far. So that's a big piece of this. Now, Congress should be conducting oversight of potential conflicts of interest in the executive branch, particularly at the highest levels of the executive branch. Right now, Congress is controlled by the GOP, both in the House and the Senate. This is probably not an issue that they're going to conduct oversight over. And then another problem is like you said, many lawmakers own stocks in individual companies. In particular, and I highlighted this at the very end of my story, there are several Democratic lawmakers who sent Palantir a letter several weeks ago after that New York Times story came out asking a bunch of pointed questions. Democrats can't force Palantir to answer any of those questions. They can't force Palantir to produce any records or documents. Right. They can't force the government to produce any records or testimony. Someone who would be the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer. He's a Republican from Kentucky. But James Comer, the day after the inauguration this January, bought stock in Palantir. That was his only stock purchase that day. I think that's been his only disclosed stock purchase of the year so far, or since the inauguration. So and that's another reason why it's not great that lawmakers own stock in individual companies, because it can intersect with things happening in the government that they should be overseeing. And it adds another reason to question their decisions not to do things or to do things. And it doesn't inspire confidence in the American public that they're doing their duties with the public's best interests in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of perfect that the person who would be in charge of conducting some kind of oversight also has stock in Palantir. That again, seems very perfect, very American in this moment.
Yeah, just to play that out a little bit more, the House Oversight Committee has specific jurisdiction over government-wide information technology issues, procurement issues. These are all things that intersect directly with Palantir, because Palantir has IT contracts at many different agencies. There's a high-profile allegation that this administration is trying to knit together data across many different agencies. Obviously, this is through contracts, because this is a private company with contracts with the federal government. It's squarely in the House Oversight Committee's jurisdiction. He's the chairman, but he's got Palantir stock. As far as I'm aware, he's done no oversight of Palantir during this administration. I asked his spokespeople to comment before my story ran. I got no response for what it's worth.
That seems like the response that you would expect, in that you would get no response. I mean, that is all just crazy. I guess to kind of like tie this up and kind of give a broader view of, I don't know, what does all of this mean? Like, I think people are very concerned. So, Stephen Miller clearly has a financial stake in continuing the ICE raids, continuing to militarize ICE. The Oversight Committee, they have a financial stake in Palantir itself. And like you said, it's data procurement activities, all of that. What does it mean for working people who are rightfully very concerned about this, concerned about their privacy, concerned about data, and the ways in which those things are weaponized against us? Because again, we're talking about this because we're talking about ICE and the ways in which people's data is being weaponized against them to, see who has self-deported, see who they can still detain and arrest. What does this mean for people? How concerned should people be? What can any of us actually do about any of this, if you have an answer about that?
I don't know if I have any brilliant insights here, but one thing that seems fairly obvious is people, whether or not you're an undocumented immigrant or not, may be less willing to share information with the federal government. I think back to the Biden years, and the Biden administration kept saying, we're not going to use the data you supply to the Customs and Border Protection had this CBP-1 app. Right. People were supposed to submit information. We're not going to use that information for other purposes. We're going to use it only this narrow way. They often say that. If you go to the airport, for instance, you have the default is you get your face scanned. You can opt out, but you have to say something. And they're always saying, we're going to delete your picture right away. We're going to delete this information. We're only going to use it in this narrow sense. And we are getting a stream of reporting over the last several months that's saying, nope, they're trying to break down these guardrails and use information you've supplied under, a certain set of understandings of how that information is going to be used for a whole bunch of other things. Some of the acting leadership of the Internal Revenue Service resigned a few months ago because they were upset that the Trump administration wanted to use IRS data for immigration enforcement reasons, which is something that they've held a line against for a very long time. So it's just, I think people need to be careful about obviously, sometimes it's impossible to avoid sharing, personal information for, legal reasons when you file taxes, et cetera. But I think people need to be careful what they disclose. I think in terms of broader collective action, a great place to change things is Congress. Congress is supposed to be the branch of government that's closest to the people. And yet when you have lawmakers, regardless of political party, owning a ton of stock in companies that are intertwined with these government programs that affect the people, and the lawmakers aren't doing anything or even promoting some of those same programs, it just, it raises questions about motivations here. I have a friend. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia. Maybe I shouldn't be sharing that personal information, given the context of all of this. who lives near Charlottesville, and his specialty is looking at the financial disclosures of lawmakers. And we were talking the other day, and he's like, "Oh, most lawmakers, just own, index funds and broadly, diversified mutual funds, and yet Congress still has been unable to, pass a law or pass rules on whether or not members of Congress can own individual stocks." And so there are some people who are stopping those reforms from happening. And even if it doesn't become law, I mean, those lawmakers on their own can do the right thing and avoid questions about, what's really motivating their decision making. But that would be a great place to start, because we need Congress to do its job, to oversee the executive branch and to pass laws that can address these issues. And I think a lot of people are just frustrating that change doesn't seem to happen. But Congress is really kind of the best place to start, because when you get, when you get a Biden administration and they, put out an executive order, and maybe those reforms are meaningful, maybe they're not, it can be easily overturned by the next administration. Those aren't lasting reforms.
Yeah, and we've seen that, since Trump took office, overturning things, pieces of the IRA, all of that kind of thing. So as you said, it's not very permanent. This was great. This was extremely insightful. Do you have any final thoughts that you would want to add? Anything else that you think people should know about this case, or anything broadly intersecting with this?
Yeah, I mean, conflicts of interest are not the only issue. My piece talks about a couple of people who are high level at the Department of Homeland Security, who are probably also involved in what ICE is doing, and they did divest themselves of Palantir stock, or at least they agreed to. So it's not a guarantee that we're going to get the policy of our dreams just because people do the right thing, ethically speaking. But we shouldn't have to also worry about, is this monetary interest really motivating this or not? And people shouldn't be profiting from their public positions.
Absolutely. Again, Nick, this was great. Everyone, you should read Nick's piece. Stephen Miller's financial stake in ICE contractor Palantir at the Project on Government Oversight. Again, Nick, thank you so much for talking with us and explaining this for viewers. I think they're going to get a lot out of this. So yeah, thank you again. And thank you to viewers of Status Coup who are watching. If you're not yet a member, you can become a member at statuscoup.com/join. Thanks again, Nick. And yeah, hope to have an opportunity to talk again and, get caught up on all of the things that are happening right now.
No, there's plenty that's happening. Thanks, Ashley.
Have a good one.